The impossible, whatever remains, however improbable, must be true.
And it is not a question of a little occultism or a touch of mysticism, Mr. Benton. It is vampires, and there's a host of damned souls at Pelham House.
I am thy father's spirit, doomed for a certain term to walk the night.
Here, the old gods aren't dead.
And what of the true god?
He's dead. Can't complain.
People assume that time is a strict progression of cause to effect, but actually, from a non-linear, non-subjective viewpoint, it's more like a big ball of wibbly-wobbly, timey-wimey stuff.
You're listening to Paranormal UK Radio.
Hi everybody, this is Irene Allen, the host of the Paranormal UK Radio Show, the flagship show of the Paranormal UK Radio Network.
Very good, you got that out.
I nearly messed that bit up, Mark.
Well, I'm keeping it in, so...
Huh?
I'm keeping it in, so...
Oh, God, you kept something in from last week as well, you pilchard.
Oh.
Anyway, I'm here again today with Mark Johnson.
You remembered...
And I remembered your name.
You remembered my name this time. I'm actually very impressed.
Yes, very good, very good.
You know, I know how, old age starts making you forget things, but...
Nanafo.
Hey,
Last week you said I was fat when I'm not. Now you're saying I'm old when I am not. Old. Well, I am not. Sort of.
Oh, sure, you're not old compared to Methuselah, but yeah, sure.
Okay, all right then. Well, I remember meeting God.
When he was a baby.
Oh yeah. Okay, forget that. Right, Mark. Listen, we've got new shows
I detect
coming,
something else in there.
Hmm?
Ooh, I'm gonna have to hit you up on that one later. Anyway.
Yeah.
So how are you?
I'm all right. You all right?
I'm all right. You all right?
Yeah, I'm all right. You okay?
Yeah, I'm doing good. Can't complain.
Right. Okay. Right, listen, Mark, we got new shows, yeah?
Yep.
New shows coming on to the network?
We have one new show that's going to be premiering next week. It will be Eleanor Wagner's Strange and Scary World. That'll be premiering on Thursday the 23rd. It'll be a bi-weekly show. I know Eleanor. She is a local paranormal researcher here in New Jersey, lives in my town. And she's written several books about haunted locations around our state. It's got a few more coming out. And now she's going to be doing her own podcast. So that will be premiering next Thursday, the 23rd. Look for her premiere episode.
Okay, lovely. And also, we want to say goodbye to Philip Mantle after all the time that he's worked on the Outer Limits radio show with Chris Evers.
Yes, I'm very sorry to see him go.
Yes, so am I. But he's got a lot of fingers in the pie elsewhere. He does his books and one thing or another, but his health hasn't been too good. So maybe. But you're always welcome back, Philip, if you're listening. But Chris Evers, got a new radio show coming out. He's preparing it now, and we're premiering that. Don't know when. Do you?
Not yet. I think he's taking a little time off to get it prepared. I think it'll probably be sometime next month. The Paranormal Panorama, I think it's called.
Paranormal Panorama.
Yes. So we will be looking for that from Chris. As soon as we get some hard dates, we'll let everybody know, because his show was, when he and Philip were doing Inside Outer Limits, the same name as his magazine. It was very popular, so hopefully the new show will go well for him.
Yeah, it will. I know it will. He's very, very clever, is Chris. So everything should be okay with that show. I'm looking forward to that show, actually, because he's going to be really delving into different subjects and different topics, different places, why, where, when, how, what, and all that sort of thing. And it's going to be interesting. It's like a docucast.
A docucast. I like that.
Yes.
That's a new
it's
one.
A new word.
A new
word. Yeah. I thought you'd enjoy that one.
Of course I do.
Yeah. We should do a docucast.
Well, we need to do... there's lots of things we need to do. Lots of things we have planned to do. It's just getting the time and resources to do them.
Yeah, and also I have to apologize for the delay in my new book coming out. Somebody has not edited it yet.
It needs to get to the editor in order to be edited.
No, just changing and titivating a couple of things on there, but it'll be out. The new spy book will be out very, very soon, hopefully. Everything's waiting for it. The cover of the lot is waiting for it, isn't it?
Yeah, everything is. Everything's waiting for the author.
Okay. All right, then. So that new spy book, which is A Spy in Paris.
Yep, part of the Psychic Spy series of books.
That's right. Okay. Right, carry on then. So what do you want to say?
Well, I think we should just get right into our show, introducing our guest tonight. Now, our guest is coming all the way from sunny Southern California by way of Toronto, Ontario, Canada.
That's a long journey.
Quite a journey, yes. Our guest tonight is Michael Anthony Gagliardi, who's the author... What? I said it right. Who's the author of his new book, Devil Take the Hindmost, A True Story of Terror. So, Michael, welcome to the program.
Well, thank you. I appreciate it so much.
Michael,
it's a pleasure to be here.
Michael, I love the way he pronounced your surname.
Oh, yeah. That's the American version.
Okay, so how's the Italian version of doing it?
Gagliardi.
It's Gagliardi.
Yeah.
Ooh, that's...
I can't roll my R's at the moment because I'm losing my voice.
Gagliardi.
Yes, Gagliardi.
Ah. Italian is not my forte.
Antonio. So.
Yeah, Michele Antonio Gagliardi.
That's it.
Very cool. Very cool. Now, I think my Italian goes as far as Peroni.
Prosecco.
Yeah, and pasta.
Prosecco. Yes, there you are.
Yes, Prosecco.
Yeah,
well, thank you so much for having me. I really appreciate it.
No problem. And so, if you could tell, I just mentioned a little bit about your biography, but if you can tell us just a little bit about yourself, and then we'll get into talking about this book, because this book sounds very, very intense.
Yeah, it is. I'm first generation Canadian. My parents are from Italy. So I was born in 1968 in a little borough, and we have boroughs in Ontario, just much like New York. You know, you have Queens and the Bronx, but we have boroughs in Toronto, like Guelph, and I was born in an Italian borough called Etobicoke. And that's where life began, and then by the time I was 5 years old, I moved to a little town on the beach of Nottawasaga, which is part of the bigger bay of Georgian Bay in northern Ontario, Canada. So not quite the East Coast, but upstate New York, and then across the border from there, actually from Niagara Falls. It's almost a straight shot to where I grew up. By the time I was 19, I vacated the country and became an expat in Southern California. We'll get into my childhood experiences, but I left at 19 and was homeless underneath the Santa Monica Pier. From what I escaped from, that was glorious to me. And I managed to, within actually a few days of that, to meet my wife that I've been married to for 36 years.
Wow.
And we have 2 kids and 5 grandchildren. So it's been a trek, and she's been with me the whole time, for better or for worse. More for worse on her side, but yeah. But it's been quite a journey, and we eventually ended up. We were displaced in the 90s from the big earthquake in Northridge, tore apart everything in Los Angeles, and we ended up moving to western Nevada by Lake Tahoe, at the bottom of Lake Tahoe, for a couple of years. They had no culture there. I'm a musician by trade, so there was nothing for me to do there. So we ended up coming down to Palm Springs. We had family members down here, and we decided to start a life here with 2 young girls. And all my grandchildren were born right here in the Coachella Valley. You've probably heard of it because of the festivals here, Coachella Fest and Stagecoach and all the Rhythm, Wine, and Brews experience and all those things. And we have been here ever since. I think we're going on 27 years here in the Coachella Valley, and we've called it home, and this is where we reside currently and do business here. Because of the atmosphere out here, there's a lot of entertainment opportunities, and I'm a Spanish and flamenco guitar player, and that's basically how I make my living. Yeah, because my PTSD is so bad from my childhood experiences, I've never been able to hold down a job. So the music is actually therapy, and I only have to do it a couple hours, every other night or so, depending on the season, which makes it very easy for me to digest. My life is a product of my childhood, and I have to navigate it very, very carefully. What I'm able to put myself in and deal with how much stress I'm able to withstand. That's kind of how I gauge my life and what I do even to this day. Well, so that's pretty much it in a nutshell.
Well, Michael, I'll tell you, you're talking to a fellow Californian. I grew up out there.
Yay.
In the San Fernando Valley, and I lived in Sylmar, so I was there for the 71 Sylmar quake and the 94 Northridge earthquake. And
okay, yeah.
So you and I both know, living through especially the Northridge earthquake, that one just really rattled your teeth and caused a lot of damage. That was pretty intense. I sit there thinking, while it was happening, I'm going, oh my God, this is the big one. We're all going to be surfing to Denver. But thankfully it wasn't as bad as it could have been.
Yeah, it was a terrible ordeal nonetheless. We had mutual friends that died in the Meadowlands apartment that washed from the second floor to the first floor.
Yep, in Northridge.
And I actually ended up, in Northridge, exactly. I ended up actually going the next day and filming all the damage, and I have an 8mm VHS tape of that, of all the damage from that as a documentary.
Yeah, I lived only about a mile and a half, 2 miles away from the I-5 interchange that all came down at that time.
Oh, yeah.
So, not very far at all. And, very, very intense period of time. But, yeah, I'm familiar. I've been to Palm Springs. I'm familiar with the whole area where you're at. So, I've been out here in Joyzy for 20 years now, so...
20 years, yeah. I'm currently in Palm Desert right now, which is just a little east of Palm Springs, for those who don't know. But all part of the Coachella Valley, 5 or 6 cities in the Coachella Valley here. See, very small valley. I think it's 75 square miles. So
right.
It's a very small area.
Well, I'm at heart a desert rat. My dad used to take us out into the desert all the time. We used to go camping out in the desert, out by California City, or all the way down by the Salton Sea. There's Anza Borrego down that way, and I love the desert. But here I am on the East Coast with snow and green leaves. So depending on the time of year. So plus, I'll throw out one last pointless thing: is I also play guitar badly, but I also have.
You don't play it that bad.
I suck. I know I suck. Plus, I do play a little classical guitar too, so I have. I play both. So
Michael, you play jazz as well, don't you?
Yes, I'm jazz, Spanish, flamenco, smooth jazz. I've opened up for B.B. King and Aaron Neville and Buddy Guy and Keiko Matsui and a whole list of people.
Yeah, I love the Spanish guitar.
Oh, so do I.
I often get Alexa playing it when I'm doing my books. I got Alexa.
Yeah, I love it.
Loud.
It's a passion of mine as well.
Yeah, don't wake up Alexa.
I love jazz as well.
Yeah, me too.
I think I've unplugged her.
So Michael, let's talk about your childhood. Now, you wrote this book, Devil Take the Hindmost.
Yes.
And it was about 12 years of you dealing with an extremely negative paranormal situation. So could you just start at the beginning and, so our audience understands where you're coming from? How old were you when this all started, and what was the situation like?
Well, it was progressive, and it started probably in about, for me, it started in around 1971. My sister, who's 7 years older than me, she said it started a little bit before that, and she won't even talk about it to this day. But the first incident I remember when I was 3 years old, and I wrote this in the book, is that we come from an Italian family, and at lunchtime it was pasta fagioli. We all had as children, or pastina. Yeah, pastina or star soup for Americans and Canadians. And I would always, my mother would call me to the table, and it would be ready, and I'd just come sit at the table and then start eating. And this one particular time, she called me to the table, and then when I got to the table, I sat down in the chair, and it wasn't there. And then she came up behind me and dumped the whole scalding pot of soup over my shoulder.
Oh boy.
And that was, and she was completely, I remember this very clearly, she was completely insensitive to my moanings and groanings and crying and screaming, and she ended up calling a taxi, and we went to the doctor. Never said a word to me, never hugged me, never told me it was going to be okay. We went to the doctor, had the doctor's appointment, and then came home, and she never said a word to me. Even as a 3-year-old, I was an extremely alert and aware child. I've got memories very far back, and I was very analytical. And I'm really not sure where that came from. It was probably because of the heightened sense of awareness that I had to have because of my situation. Children are remarkable individuals. They are able to tolerate a lot more things than adults are. So this was the beginning of of something that was very, very strange. And by the time I was 5 years old, we moved to Meaford, Ontario, which is a good 100 miles straight north as the crow flies from Toronto, Ontario, Canada. When we moved into that house, things began to get a little worse. She began to talk to herself. She began to alienate herself from the family. And, I thought, as a child, because it was so slow and so progressive, I was the proverbial, frog in the hot water. You turn it up a little by little. And even by the time I was 19 years old and the whole thing was over, I had no idea what had happened to me, because I didn't find it strange because I grew up in it. Mm-hmm. As, a lot of people who grow up in certain situations, they're not even aware, especially if you're a child, you're not aware of what's going on. But my father was never home. He was never home. He came home for a couple hours on the weekend, and then he was gone. So my sister and I, we basically lived at home with my mother, and we had no communications. She began to alienate herself, and we just said, "Oh, she's crazy. She's just talking crazy." And as the years went by, it got worse, and increasingly worse, and becoming violent. And then she would go around to the neighbors and knock on their doors. And when they came to the door, she'd tell them she was going to cut their heads off. So this went on for years. And of course, the police would come. They'd interview her. She would be, no worse for wear, and speak very eloquently, like, I don't understand why you're here, all this kind of stuff. And we would just be sitting back going like, what the hell is going on here? And then the years continued to go on. It got worse and worse. Her conversations became more evil. They became more, they changed from her monotone single voice, to multiple voices, arguing back and forth, and sometimes in different languages. And, as a kid, it was all babble to me, but this went on, and it got worse and worse until I think I was maybe 13 years old, when I got called out of school. There was a policeman and someone else came to our class and pulled me out of school, and I went home with my neighbor's father, and he had mentioned that something had happened. Well, what had happened was that my mother tried to kill my sister with a butcher knife. And so I realized that she was taken away at that moment, because she chased my sister out the door and around the car. And the neighbors saw, and they called the police. The police came, and she was taken away by a mental institution. And this was the beginning of it getting really, really, really bad. My sister had told me after that all took place that my mother said that she yelled from the kitchen that they told her that she was a witch and had to be killed. And good enough for my sister was that morning, when I left for school, I was lazy. And, in Canada, we have what you call, mud rooms, where you take your boots off, and then come into the main room. So you've got a door.
Yeah, we call them boot rooms. Yeah. I've got one.
Yeah. And that's what it was. It was just a small little cubicle of room where you went through one door, and then you would go exit out two doors to go outside. So that morning I had left the entry door of our house wide open, and the screen door, I had just popped it and ran out the door, and it didn't close all the way. And my sister said, because you left those two doors open, I'm alive today. Because if she had to fiddle with the doors because one of them stuck, that mother was so close behind her, she would have killed her. So that was the beginning of it getting really bad. And then from that point, when she was in the mental institution, we thought that, this is just a mental problem or whatever. Within 3 months, she came back home. She signed herself out because she signed herself in. And I guess at that time during the 70s and early 80s, that was the policy. And so she was cognitive enough to realize that she could do that, and that's exactly what she did. So she came home. I don't know where social services was or if they even existed at that time. I'm sure they did, but here you've got an attempted murder, and then she's right back in the home. Nothing has changed with the children. I mean, I don't think my sister, she might have been no, she wasn't 17. I think she was 20. I think she was 20 at the time. So when she came back, my sister left. She went and lived with my grandmother down in Toronto, which was 100 miles away down south. And then from that point on, things started to get really, really bad. Okay. She started going into trances. She started breaking out of these trances and then going into these conversations, laughing, whistling, singing in high voices continuously. And this went on for hours and hours and hours on end. I would leave in the morning and come back at 8 o'clock at night, and she'd still be sitting in the same chair doing the exact same thing.
Okay. Before we
time
continue,
went by with this. Go ahead.
I'm sorry, Michael. I want to just interrupt you a little bit before we go any further, just to ask a couple of questions that I know, and again,
Sure.
I'm saying this with sensitivity. Without judgment. I know our audience members listening are probably going to be thinking the same thing. Now, was your mother ever
Mental problem
diagnosed? Because it almost sounds like a form of paranoid schizophrenia. But was she ever officially diagnosed or put on medication or anything like that by a physician?
Yes, she was, and it didn't work.
Mm-hmm.
When she came back, she was on medication when she came back home, but nothing changed. Nothing had changed at all. And in fact, she got worse. And then what started to happen is she began, not only did these conversations escalated, but they became more intense, more evil, with more voices, more arguing, and then she began to beat herself with a log across her chest. And I mean thumping herself with this log for 10, 12, 14 hours a day. There were times where I would leave and come home and park my bike and hear the thuds from outside. And she'd be laughing and screaming and carrying on. And I would come up to her, and after all these years had gone by, I had been to the point where I was shaking incessantly, and I didn't know how to deal with this anymore. I mean, I was 13 or 14 years old by that time, and I would go literally 6 inches from her face and yell and scream at her to shut up and stop. And she wouldn't even acknowledge that I was there. It was incredible now when I think of it. And she began to hit herself with this log, and this went on for years. And she would lift up her leg really high and then drop her leg while she was hitting herself and having these conversations. I mean, she was multitasking at an incredible level. And this kind of stuff went on every day until nighttime. Nighttime is when it started to get hairy. She began to scream. She began to make comments about Satan jumping off the ceiling, jumping from the ceiling down upon her chest. And she would try to get into my room every night. So for 7 or 8 years, I believe it was about 7 or 8 years, I slept with my armoire up against the door and a hockey stick. And I slept in the fetal position for all of that time, never moving, for so long that I created these huge divots right down to the springs in my mattress from my knee, my hip, my elbow, and my ankle. And I would hold this hockey stick till morning. And every night she would try to get in my room. Now, my sister, during that time when she was living there, she had put a lock on her room for the inside, and she basically lived in her room with her lock on even during the daytime.
Now,
so
you
this
mentioned,
went on.
You mentioned that your father traveled a lot, but by this time, after all these many years, he had to have noticed that by this time something was wrong. And if so, what was he thinking?
Well, like I said, he would only come home for a couple of hours. He ignored it. My father is an interesting man. He grew up in World War II. He had a 4th grade education, and he didn't speak English very well. In fact, I had to make out his bills because he couldn't spell like 27 and 38 and things like that. He was never home. He just omitted it and ignored it and just said, "Oh, she's crazy." And so I never got any help from him. There was no intervention from him whatsoever. My mother and father never spoke. But interestingly enough, when he was in the room, and it was for, maybe an hour or less, because he'd come home, get something to eat. He was an avid fisherman, and he had a girlfriend at the time, so he was never home. My mother would prophesy and talk about all the things that he was doing. And I would see on my father's face that he would be blushing. And I had no idea what was going on, but she would say where he was that day, what he was doing, and this is something my mother did. She actually, to my sister, prophesied about President Kennedy. She said that President Kennedy was going to be shot in the head, and she did this with a number of things. And we all just kind of, discounted it as, oh, you're crazy and stuff like that. She tried to kill the cat. During all this time, she burned everything we owned in the fireplace, which caught on fire maybe a dozen times, and the fire department was always at our house. She sat in the chair literally 4 feet from the fireplace that was literally red hot. I mean, the chimney was glowing red hot. Firemen were coming in and out, trying to put out the fire from the top and from the bottom. She never once moved from her chair, and she never once broke from her routine of hitting herself, whistling, screaming, yelling, and conversating in these voices. There were a couple of lucid moments, and I think maybe I was 15 or 16, where she would go into these, I'm not going to say trances, but she would be lucid, and she would be very quiet for a few minutes. And I remember during that time, she had this half-hearted attempt to reach out to me and say to me, like someone who was in jail and never seen somebody before in a long time and saw somebody walk by, and at the desperation trying to get their attention to help me to get out. This is the scenario I'm trying to set up for you. She would say to me, they're coming into me. They run up the back of my spine and perch in my head. They're in me. And then as quick as she could say that, boom, she was gone, whistling, singing. And then here came the conversations with multiple voices and all this kind of thing. And it went on so many hours of the day without stopping that I never saw her sleep. I would not venture out of my room, but I could hear her walking around because at that point she was morbidly obese. She was probably, she was 5 feet tall and she might have weighed 300 pounds. And she was ravaging the house of everything that we had. She would eat everything, whether she was hungry or not. It was as if we had an animal in the house. The behavior was unrealistic for a human being. And then this all culminated on one afternoon. I think I was 16 at the time. And what had happened was I had come home from being at a friend's house. I parked my bike, and we have a basement. As you know, most East Coasters have, a basement. Mm-hmm. And there's usually two ways in, one from the house and one from outside to get into the basement. So I came in through the basement, and I saw her. We have this great big huge freezer. So my dad started putting all of our food into the freezer, and he put a big chain on it with a lock on it. Well, I had happened to come downstairs, and I noticed her with a hacksaw trying to cut through the chain. And the only thing that came to mind was to yell, "Hey." I yelled, "Hey." She never moved her body. She turned her head around, and she sneered at me and snarled like an animal. It wasn't a voice that I could associate her with. It was very guttural. It was very manly. And she dropped the hacksaw and went running upstairs like I'd never seen her move before. I mean, you're talking about a woman who's as wide as she is tall. She was, very morbidly obese, but she scampered upstairs with incredible speed. And at that point, I was so drawn to the evil that I was like, you know what? Just kill me and get it over with. I don't know how to explain it. It's in my book. I was able to describe it better. But I wanted this to end. Her or me. I wanted this to end. If she was going to kill me, just get it over with. But what had happened was I ran upstairs after her, and believe it or not, I'm like 16 years old. So I'm, I weigh 120 pounds. I'm 6 feet tall. I'm fast. And I went upstairs, and she had gone. And I went to her bedroom, and I went to open the door because, like I said, I was drawn like a moth to the flame, to the evil. I just wanted this over. I was experiencing such trauma and stress for so many years that I couldn't bear it anymore. And I thought to myself, this is it. This is it. So I went to open the door, and she was leaning against the door, and I couldn't open the door. And, normally she's only 5 feet tall. I was much stronger. I couldn't push the door open, and I couldn't turn the door because she was holding the door. So I kept banging on the door, and all I could hear on the other side of the door was heavy breathing and this snarling, this guttural snarling. And I was like, my God, what the hell is in there? But I had to find out because I was at the point where, it's you or me. This has got to be it. I can't live like this anymore. So I continued to try and open the door. I pushed on it as hard as I could. I banged on the door. Nothing would give. So I stood back for a minute, about 10 minutes, and I just stood there in utter quiet. And then I could see the door start to depress because she was leaning on it. So I physically saw the door depress. And then I couldn't hear her, but I could still hear her, this just guttural, low, kind of, it wasn't growling at that point. So what I did is I quickly opened up the door. The second I opened up the door, she had a barrel of, my dad used to say pennies. She had this barrel of pennies in one arm, and she threw them at my face, and she dropped them and lunged at me and started snarling. But before she did that, when I swung the door open for that second, we met face to face. We were probably, I don't know, maybe 3 feet apart. Before she lunged at me and threw the pennies at me, I could see her face, and I looked in her face. The left side of her face was bulging above her eyebrow and around her temple area. It was bulging and contorting, and her eyes were these circles of black pools. She had no, how do you say, the iris, the pupil. She had no pupil. And she was and then she came running at me. When I saw her face and she lunged at me, just that split second, I saw the bulging in her face. A terror gripped me, and I started running, and she started chasing me. Well, I ran outside. She did not follow. And then I heard, maybe 5 seconds later, I heard her bedroom door slam with such incredible strength that it sucked all the air out of the house. I don't know if you know what that's like when somebody slams the door and you've got windows and doors open. Oh, yeah. It just sucks all the air, out of the house. So there was this tremendous slam, and I was outside, and I was in utter, complete shock. I couldn't say a word. I was trying to speak some words, and I was like, and that's what I was doing. I could not compose myself. So I was thinking to myself, I've got to contact my dad. I knew where my dad was. He was at his girlfriend's house at the time. And I knew that just inside the door of the first door to the lobby or the mudroom was our phone. So I could reach in, pull the phone, and bring it outside. So this was my plan. So I opened the door. I swung the door open and left the doors open to make sure that she wasn't standing there, so I'd have ample room to run out. Sorry, when I talk about this stuff, it activates my trauma. It's very difficult for me.
No, it's okay.
I reached
we
in,
understand.
and of course we had dial phones back then,
Mm-hmm.
So I reached in, I grabbed the phone. It had a long cord on it, and I brought it outside. And I was trying to dial the numbers, 538 something. I remember it's 538 because that's what our prefix was. And I couldn't even dial the first number. I couldn't get the first 5 to go around to the little, the little limit there where your finger stops as far as you go. I couldn't get the numbers to dial because I couldn't get my finger in the hole. I was so shocked at what I had just witnessed that it took me 20 minutes to dial the number. And when I finally got the number right, I might have dialed the number maybe 10 or 12 times unsuccessfully. and hearing that, we're sorry that the number you try to dial is not valid and whatever. So when I finally got it, my father's girlfriend answered the phone, and I just said, Dad. And she put my dad on the phone. He was, he's like, what's going on? And I couldn't get out the words. I was stuttering, and I just said the word mom. And he said, I'll be there. I'm coming. So I hung the phone up. I waited outside. A few minutes later, it's a small town, so he was probably less than half a mile away. He showed up. He parked the truck. I couldn't talk. I was just trying to explain to him, and I really couldn't explain anything. I was still in shock.
Sure. Yeah.
I followed him. Yeah, I followed him, and he opened the door. And when he opened the door, my mother was standing there and grabbed him. My dad's 5'7". He was 5'7", about 170 pounds. She grabbed him. I was standing right there. She grabbed him in the living room, threw him to the ground, jumped on him, and started scratching and tearing at his face like an animal. And here came the growling and these guttural sounds. My dad was panicking for his life. I was standing there in abject shock at this point now, watching another experience. And I didn't jump in to help. I didn't do nothing. I was just watching. And he had managed to get himself up, and he ran outside, and I followed him. And once again, 5 seconds later, we heard this tremendous slam of a door. And of course, the same thing happened. The air sucked out, out of the house. Just tremendous slam. All the curtains moved, and, you could see it and feel it. When I was standing outside with my dad was traumatized, and he couldn't talk because he had just witnessed something that was unnatural, and it traumatized him. And even today, we never talked about this. We've never said a word to each other since that day. And we didn't say any words to each other that day, in that minute when it happened. By the time he was able to collect himself, he called the police. The police called the mental institution, and they came. Of course, they came and interviewed her. We could hear her. I could hear her from outside because her bedroom window was open, and it was right there in the front, where I parked my bike. I could hear her talking to the police, just like normal. Oh, officer, I don't understand what the problem is. We never even heard her talk like that. In our normal, everyday, basic life, we never heard her talk like that, ever. It was always this crazy screaming and yelling and all these conversations and in different languages. And I'll tell you something very, very interesting. As a product of hearing that, almost all of my life, her speaking in different languages and different tongues, I, to this day, love languages and speak not bad English, Italian, French, German, Arabic, and a little bit of Spanish, because it traumatized me not knowing what she was saying. And it was like there was a key that I was not allowed to have. So I learned languages. So what happened that day was that they bound her in a white straitjacket, and they took her away to the mental institution. And once again, 3 months later, she returned. And at that time, when she returned, I couldn't deal with this anymore. There's no way I could have her. I was shaking so bad. Now I shook every day. I shook all day long. I had such severe PTSD that later on in life, I had spoke to several psychiatrists, and they would just say to me, "I can't deal with it. I can't help you. This is way above my head. There's no way I can help you." These psychiatrists were beginning to tell me to go to psychiatrists that were dealing with POWs from Vietnam, who killed children, in villages and stuff like this, bombs, and, killing their captors and, slitting their throats and stuff like this. This is the extent of where they tried to get me help. And every psychiatrist that I spoke to, none of them could help me. Every one of them had to bow out because they did not have, they said, I've never heard of anything like this in my entire life. I can't help you. I'm sorry. Yeah. And I've been dealing with the ramifications of this my entire life. It's just after 40 years that I've been able to talk about this. And still, it's very, very difficult for me. Like, I'm shaking right now just talking about it. And that's just,
it seems
just
to
common.
me, yeah, Michael, it seems to me that she's been through the 5 stages to demon possession. You know, with the oppression one,
Yes.
that's when you start talking in languages, and you mentioned that she threw your father on the floor. There's super strength.
Yes.
And things
Yes.
like that.
Yeah.
And you mentioned about her eyes.
Yeah, eyes going black.
Yes. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, that's what traumatized me. When I saw her face and I saw bubbling on her left side. I don't know if you've ever seen the video of Frenchie, Mr. Thibault, his exorcism. You see his forehead bulging. It bulges and pulses. That's what her forehead did. Only on the left side. Only on the left side. And that's what traumatized me. I couldn't speak after that.
You never thought...
I don't even know if I spoke.
Yeah. Did you ever think during this time of contacting a priest?
No. In fact, we were very religious. Well, my mother actually was a Jehovah's Witness for many years, and so was my father. But they had been excommunicated. But, going back to the psychology of, the flames were turned up on me so gradual over so many years that I didn't really know there was a problem here. Like, I wouldn't go to school and say, oh my God, my mother's driving me crazy. She's, what she did to me today or what she did today. I never talked about it. It's as if it wasn't an issue.
Yeah, but it's also
yes, and social services. Yeah, they never got involved. And she, this happened twice where they took her away in a straitjacket. And, when I was writing this book, I had called the same mental institution that she was at. And I had called her, this was just, several months ago. Not even several months ago, maybe 3-4 months ago, just before the book was finished. I had talked to people there and I said, listen, I need to get some records from this lady in late 70s, early 80s. And they said, oh, those records would have been destroyed. And she says, well, just for the hell of it, just tell me the name. And I told her the name, and she said she was on the computer. I could hear her, tapping the keys. And she goes, wait a minute. She goes, this is odd. She goes, it says that her records are in the archives in a campus, in a campus, off campus, in a building off campus.
Yeah.
And I said, can you get me those records? And she says, oh, sure. You pay the $35 fine. Well, and I said, call me back, please, as soon as you get them. She never called me back. I ended up calling back twice. I got the runaround. No one would talk to me. No one would give me any information, and it died at that stage.
They kept you $35.
I don't know why.
Yeah?
Well, no, I never gave them the $35 because they never gave me the documents. But she was like, oh, yeah, it's no problem. We'll retrieve the records and we'll give them, you sign a release form and you're a next of kin, so you pay $35. But no one would get back to me. But she said, oddly enough, she goes, that is so strange. These are held in the archives in another building off campus.
So something must have been happening.
They get destroyed.
So something must have been happening that was severe enough while she was incarcerated there that they felt it important to keep those records.
Yeah, but you'd think, Mark, wouldn't you, that if something was so severe, if she was so bad in the hospital, then when she let herself out, that they would have tipped off the authorities. Well, she was dangerous.
I'm surprised that she was let out at all because, I mean, if she was exhibiting any kind of behavior like that while she was in there, unless, and of course, I don't know if you would ever talk to anybody who remembered her being there or heard any stories of her being in there, but it almost sounds like maybe if whatever it was that was going on inside of her, like when the police would show up and she'd be perfectly innocent.
Yeah.
Who's to say she didn't pull that act while she was in there, so they felt she wasn't a danger and let her out?
Mm.
Yes. It was definitely a kind of a cat and mouse game. And, growing up in Eastern Canada, in a small town of 4,500, at that point when that happened, they had several doctors. I had to go someplace. I don't remember where it was. It was in Meaford. And I had to give a testimony of what happened. And they were giving me counsel. They're saying, okay, now this doctor's going to come in and counsel you. And then and there's another doctor wants to come in and counsel you too. And they counseled me in a way that was like, you love music, right? Well, you should just leave. This is what they were doing. They were telling me to leave and pursue my dreams. And I said to them, I was very sarcastic, and I said to them, because they said she might be back. And I said, so basically, the only way I can escape this is if I come to you with a knife in my back. And I was very sarcastic and very angry with them, and they had no recourse to what I was saying. It's as if they were trying to either cover it up, but once again, it had the same thread of credibility that it was like over their head. They did not know what they were doing.
Now, with all of this going on, I'll be honest with you. I'm a paranormal investigator. Irene has been involved investigating the paranormal for many, many years. I have never personally dealt with anything that I would consider to be negative or demonic.
It's very rare.
It's very rare. But Irene, you have. So, but everything that I understand, and Irene, you can correct me on it, is in most cases, there's other types of phenomenon that goes along with it, not just the possession portion and the person displaying all this, animal sounds or body changing or whatnot. Did you ever feel any type of energy oppression in the house? Did you ever feel things come and go, or actually experience any other types of paranormal activity?
They weren't connected to your mother.
Yes, and from a very early age. I felt, when I was 3 years old, I felt a demonic presence within our house. And growing up in that house, during the nighttime, my mother would take on this whole different persona at nighttime. You'd hear the screaming, and just shrill screaming. And then in her room, it's a good thing this is a 2-hour show, because there's a lot of stuff I get caught up in my PTSD and I forget to mention. But, it's in my book. But in her room, there would be banging on the wall, on all 4 walls, like there was 3 people wrestling in there. And that there was banging, there was scratching, there was all this kind of like there were more people in her room than just herself. And then, there were times where she would go in her room and I would hear this kind of stuff, and I hadn't gone to bed yet, and I would sneak really fast. I would run from the living room right into her room and open her door. And she'd be just lying there in her bed with her covers pulled up to her neck and her eyes just completely glazed over, staring at the ceiling. And I had just heard all of this banging coming from her room. I'm talking, but not banging like bang, 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 bang on the wall. I'm talking like it sounded like sound effects from a movie, like there's 3 people fighting in a room and they're getting tossed around.
Yeah, Michael, this was when you were a baby, yeah?
No, that's when I was older.
Did you ever talk to your mother about it? Ask her what she thought it was?
No, I never talked to her about it. She was unapproachable. She was either always in this state like in a trance. She was unreachable. She was not there. Like I told you, I would yell in her face just out of absolute frustration because I couldn't stand all this thumping and dropping her leg and screaming and whistling. I mean, she would, like, I don't know if you're familiar with the Roland Doe case, about the boy in St. Louis who's possessed by many demons. I researched that, and he sang all these wonderful songs, really in a high voice, and he whistled. That's what she did. She did that all day long, every day, and then it would, in a split second, it would turn around. She'd be talking like this, and then, and then she would be looking to the right side of her, and then talking to her, and then her voice would change. And then she'd be looking to the left side of her, and then burst out into great gaspy airs of laughter, and then begin to whisper. It was absolute circus chaos. And this went on every freaking day of my life for so long. I just wanted to die. I wanted her to kill me or me to kill her. And there was actually one time where I beat her. And I look back at that today, it's in my book, and I'm horrified, but I just did not know what to do. I mean, I was losing my sanity at 16 years old. I was losing it, and it showed up in my school grades too. Up until that point, I was an overachiever. I had won every award there was to win. I was the captain of every team. I won every academic award, and then by grade 10, it started to have its way on me, and and then you see me. I went from academic to failing grades, and and no one at school even recognized anything. In fact, the school counselor, when I went in to say I quit, she said to me, these were her exact words: "Are you sure you want to quit?" And I said, "Yep." And she said, "Okay, sign here." That was the extent of my counseling from leaving school. From absolute academic every year in my life to failing grades,
Michael,
and nobody saw the signs.
Yeah.
Yes.
Now that we're in a day of the internet and everything, and it's very easy to find out things about addresses where we live, have you ever tried to do research on the house?
I have been back a couple of times. And I actually mentioned this in my. I'm writing the sequel right now called The Aftermath. So what has happened since all that? The first book, Devil Takes The Hindmost, goes to 19 years old, and then The Aftermath is everything from 19 on. I have stood in front of that house, and the people inside have stood at the window and looked at me back, and neither one of us said a word. And I've never knocked on the door, and I've never said. In fact, I don't think I've even released the address because I fear for the people.
No, don't do that. But when they looked at you from the window, did they look as if they were curious? Who's that looking at us? Who's that staring at us?
Yes,
or did
because
they
we're
just
talking
stand
about
there
a very
like
small.
zombies?
Yeah, you're talking about a very small town in Canada, and we're very much like England. We're very polite people. You do not stare at somebody in front of somebody's window. We're very much like the British. We're very polite. We're very cordial.
I don't know so much.
As Canadians.
I don't know. If somebody stood outside my house staring in, I'd open that front door and say, "Who you screwing?"
Yeah. Yeah, but that I just, I was there, and the wonderful thing, and I'll kind of give this away, is that that first time when I went back after, 23 years, 25 years, I brought my wife and 2 children with me. We stood outside on the little creek that was right there by my house, and one by one, every person on that street that was there when I was little growing up there still lived there and came out to talk to me. And they said to me, "My God, is that Michael? You survived. You survived." And they all were extremely compassionate to me, and they all told their story about, what happened to you, because I don't think they really understood what was really going on, but they knew something was very wrong. And they were all still there 25 years later, and they all came outside. They all gave me a hug, and they said, "We're so glad to see you doing well. You got a wife and 2 children." It was just wonderful to have that, because when these are not normal stories.
No.
So when you go through something like this, you feel like you're the freak of the world.
Mm-hmm.
There's no one to relate to.
Here's
and
a
that's
question.
one of the hardest problems of my life.
Well, this is it. This is it. There is nobody that you can really turn to that can understand exactly what you're going through at that particular time.
Well, I also wanted to focus. Irene, you had asked him about the house, but didn't you say it's actually started in another house and then you moved?
Well, it's not the house; it's the person.
I understand, and
this did start. Yeah,
that's what I wanted to clarify.
It started. Yes,
it started in one house,
Toronto, in Mississauga.
Okay, now for your entire life that you can remember, you've never remembered a time when your mother wasn't affected by this, correct?
Correct.
Okay,
but the progression of it was, it progressed.
Okay, now your sister is an older sister.
Yes, 7 years elder.
Okay. Yeah. If she was 7 years elder, did she remember a time when your mother was normal before this happened?
She may have, but like I said, she doesn't talk about it. She never talks about this. We cannot talk about this. She hasn't even told her kids, and her kids are in her 30s, and they are in the dark about it. All they know is something bad happened to my Uncle Mike and, their mother. But they've never known. But I think they do now, because my daughter and her daughter, because of the internet, have shared this. And I have not heard from my sister in the last 4 months. So I'm figuring she knows now, and then she's completely cut me off, because this was her secret. This was our secret, and we would have conversations a little bit about it. And she says, no, it doesn't affect me at all. She was in complete denial. But I know that she was in denial because she never told her kids, and they point blank asked her, what happened to you? I'm pretty sure now they know, because they've been connected from my daughter, and the book's available online. It's in the public now. But she will not talk about it. And like I said, I haven't heard from her in the last 4 months, which means that she's probably cut me out of her life.
Let's hope not.
I hope not, too. Hopefully she comes around. You could be able to talk about it, because I think it's very important to find out some history and find out some information, because these things just don't happen for no reason. There's usually something that brings it on. Now
there's background.
Your folks.
Yes, there's background.
Your folks came from Italy and moved to Canada, correct?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. I do find it a little unusual that they were Jehovah's Witnesses. I mean, not that every Italian has to be Catholic, but a majority of right. Catholics are Italian. So I'm curious as to what drew them to that religion or that form of Christianity.
I would tell you, Mark, it's Mark, right?
Yes.
Yeah, I would tell you that my suspicions about all this lead back to some conversations I had with my sister. And when my mother was younger, but when she was, probably 18 years old, her father, whom she loved dearly, beloved father, was killed in a tragic accident. And I believe that the entry point to all this was that my mother tried to contact him through seances with her sister. Because I remember when we lived in the house in Toronto, way back when I was 3 years old, we're talking 1971, I remember hearing the word seance and hearing, when I would go to bed, you can still hear the adults talking, and I would hear them talk about ghosts and all this kind of thing, and seance. I always heard that word. And I really believe that my mother, because she was completely had her legs cut out from under her when her father died. And I believe she tried to contact her father through a seance. Because you're talking like late 60s, early 70s. That's when seances and those kind of things were big. were big
Yeah,
back
that's
then,
true.
Yeah,
you
and I think that
my parents tried it as well once.
yes, and I think that
about
was
the time.
the entry point, because from conversations with my sister, she says that's kind of when things, because there was some big fallout in our family, and to this day I still don't know what it is, but my mother and her sister broke apart. And that's when we moved 110 miles away. Because the weird thing is we moved 110 miles away, but then my dad had to drive 110 miles back down to work 5-6 days a week. It made no sense whatsoever, but something happened, and all of those family members never came and visited us again. So I don't know what happened, but something went wrong. Something went very wrong. And I think my mother's decline, it seemed, started when her father died. You know, you can even see, I only have a few pictures of my mother. There's probably 10 pictures of my mother. And I included 2 of them in the book that my dad gave to me. Those two pictures, one is at Christmas time in 1957, and the other one is at her wedding in 1958. Both pictures are side by side with my dad, and she looks the epitome of unhappiness in both pictures. She does not have no smile on my face. My dad's kind of smirking a little bit, you know, but she has just zero. There's like no life in her at all. Her mouth is a straight line, and there's nothing in her eyes.
Yeah, hold on a minute.
And that's Christmas.
Michael, hold on a minute.
Sure.
It's all right. It's one of my dogs is sneezing.
No.
We couldn't hear it on this end.
As she's sneezing, she's banging her head on the sofa.
Oh, sweet thing.
Well, let me ask you, and this is sensitive, I understand. What eventually happened to your mother?
Well, here's the interesting thing, is that when I left, what happened was, there's a lot more to the story. Mm-hmm. But what happened was my father and my mother separated, okay? My dad set her up with an apartment half an hour away in another town, much bigger town. And then I left for California. There were 4 other guys supposed to come with me, and we were supposed to go to California together. All of them got cold feet. By the last day, I went by myself. You know, I had nothing to lose. I was homeless on the Santa Monica Pier. I chose the Santa Monica Pier because Three's Company. You know, we had no internet in that time. I watched Three's Company. I saw that they were on the pier in Santa Monica. I said, that's the place I'm going to go. It's real, and I'm going to go there. So what had happened was I had been in California. I gave my number to a family member that lives in Upland, and I was living in Glendale at the time with a girl I'd met. They got a hold of me 2 weeks later and told me, your mother died. And I said, she died? She says, yeah. And they found her because she was, you know, they could smell the smell. The other tenants could smell, you know, death. So they opened up their door, and she had died. She had died 1 week earlier, 7 days earlier, the coroner put it at. It was the exact day that I left for California. She was 46 years old and had no gray hair. She died at 46 years old, and she died of a heart attack by atherosclerosis because she ate like an animal. And if you're familiar with the Annalise Michel case, they starved her to death. With my mother, she was a ravenous animal. She ate everything to the point where even if she wasn't hungry, that we had to lock it in a freezer and put a chain around it. That's not normal. That's not natural. And she died at 46 years old.
That's terrible. And that was the day you left for California?
The day I left.
Wow.
Yep. They estimated, the coroner said that she had been dead X amount of days. I think it was 7 or 8 days, which landed on the very day that I left. So it was if, like, you know, a mission accomplished kind of deal, you know. But, I want to mention, like I did before, there were several times during her lucid moments where she tried to reach out to me. I mean, I'm a kid. What do I know? I don't know what's going on. But several times she reached out to me and said, they're coming into me. They're coming into me. They run up the back of my spine into my head. And then, boom, she's gone. It's like she was talking too much, and then they just took her over. And she would instantaneously go from looking at me in my eyes to laughing hysterically and, like this, instantaneously. And this, like I said, this went on. From everything that I've read, I've documented and researched every exorcism and demonic possession case since the 13th century. I've read every transcript. I've listened to every recording, seen every video, everywhere. My story seems to be the most aggravated of them all because it went on for so long. And she suffered. She suffered.
Mm.
And the family suffered, and the neighbors suffered, and the police suffered, and nobody knew how to deal with it. And I'm not saying that they knew it was demonic possession. Of course not, because they love to hide. They hide behind illnesses. They hide. They hide. They don't want to leave the sanctuary. They don't want to leave. That's why they possess people, because they don't want to leave. They got a home. But no one was able to deal with this. No one ever came to the house and said, you know what, there's children in that house.
Yeah,
that's the kind of thing.
I can't understand. But then again, 70s or 80s.
Yeah, it was very hush-hush. Yeah, nobody wanted to talk about anything. If it was today, oh my God, it'd be worldwide news and all that kind of thing.
It'd be everywhere.
Yeah, but there was no help. There was no help. So the suffering continued. My sister was brave enough to get out. She had had enough. She didn't even like my grandmother, but she went and lived with her just to get out, because anything was better than this. And that's why it was so easy for me to leave for California, because living on the beach in California, homeless, where do I sign up? Anything was better than this trauma I was dealing with every day. It was terrible.
Yeah.
It's
so sad.
It's
sad.
Yeah, I just don't know how, like I was saying before, I feel like the freak of the world. I feel so alone in this world. But I do, because I can't talk to anybody, because it has affected me, and that's what the book The Aftermath is about. Obviously, it changed the chemical balance of my body. I didn't go through puberty until I was like 22. It changed me so radically that everything that I like, the world doesn't like. Everything that I do, the world thinks it's backwards. I do everything backwards. And I cannot relate to the world.
Talking about it and having written the book, you're getting it out of your system a little bit. Do you feel any better after doing this?
Yes, it definitely helps. It definitely helps, but, like I said, my PTSD is still there. I shake every night. I have to medicate myself to knock myself out because I shake so bad, and then I end up passing out. And I've passed out probably 12 times in the last 2 years, hit my head, and, for sake of not dying, I have to go to bed and take medication, and I'm gone for the night. And when I wake up with my face all numb and tingling, and I wake up shaking. That's what wakes me up. That's my alarm clock in the morning, is my face going numb and shaking. And it's been like that for very, very long.
About it? Do you ever have nightmares?
I had severe insomnia, nightmares for probably 13 or 14 years. The same recurring dream over and over and over and over. Her coming after me, and no matter what I do. In my dreams, I'd take a baseball bat to her head, and she'd just turn around and laugh at me and keep on coming. And that went on 13, 14 years. Severe insomnia, and the mental anguish that I can't hold a job. And I don't go to Social Security going, I've got PTSD. Can I have money? I've never done that. I've always tried to pick myself up, dust myself off, and move forward. But at 54 years old, I know my limitations. There's only so much I can do. I can only handle being around people a couple hours at a time. I can't stand being in a meeting. I can't stand sitting there, somebody talking and me sitting there. I can't stand it. I can't deal with it. I have to move. The atmosphere has to change. The scenery has to change for me. Everyone's a threat. For years, everyone was a threat. Every room that I was in, I planned my escape route. I mean, the amount of energy I had to spend dealing with the mental anguish of it is incredible. I mean, the only thing I can reckon it to is that movie, A Beautiful Mind. I totally relate to that. Mm-hmm. I mean, I was remembering license plates and what people were wearing in a room, how close they were to me, if they were a threat, could I take them? If I couldn't take them, how could I avoid them? Where's my nearest escape route? All this kind of stuff. I would start fights with people just to get it over with, because I thought, you know what, you're a menace. You're looking at me weird. We're going to end up fighting anyway. Let's fight now. It just, what it's done to me is just, it's completely shattered me as an individual, but like I said, I hide it well, and I've just learned to dust myself up and go through life, because I have no other choice. I have 2 children and 5 grandchildren. I'm there for them now. I'm not here for me, I'm there for them. I got to hold it together for their sake, not for my sake.
Speaking of,
I'm last on the list.
Yeah. Speaking of your family, how is your wife, since you've been with her for so long? How has she handled all of this, and what's her opinion of it?
Well, she just walked in the door just now.
Oh, tell her we said hi.
They say hi. She says hi back.
Okay.
She has put up with the second generation of my mother. Everything that they destroyed me, she's seen it all. She's been a trooper. She's been there when she should have left many times. She's still here. She still fights the fight with me, and she's still here because she knows me. She knows who I am, and that my failures and mental anguish, that's not me. That's just the product of me. She knows I'm a good man. She knows I love my kids. She knows I love her. She knows I love my grandkids, and I'd do anything for them. But she has taken probably the most brunt of it out of anyone in the family, just because of the proximity, in our relationship and being here. And that's not to say that she hasn't wanted to leave and hasn't left a couple of times, but has come back knowing that no one else is here for me. I am like this freak of the world. I've yet to hear somebody have a similar experience. Most of the exorcisms of people demonically possessed last, the longest is 9 months, 10 months, maybe a year, maybe a couple of years unchecked, but never this duration. And what it's done to me is there is no way it could not have an impact on me. Like I said, it changed my body chemistry. I didn't grow hair under my arms until I was like 22 years old. And even that is just a little peach fuzz. And to this day, I only have a little tiny bit. It radically distorted everything in life for me. What normal life is about. I had to learn how to be a father by watching Little House on the Prairie and the Waltons. That's how I learned to be a father.
Well, it's a good thing you didn't watch Married with Children.
I'm sorry?
I said it was a good thing you didn't watch Married with Children then.
Yes. Well, I saw them as moral, upstanding men that, that were celebrated as good fathers on TV. And I said, okay, I need to adapt my lifestyle with that, because I had no role model. My dad was never there. He was, he had mafia ties. He ran with the Luciano Pavarotti brothers, and Luciano Pavarotti, he's mafia.
Yeah.
Yeah, they had their little deal in Toronto there. My dad knew them very well, and they were compadres and fratelli for a very long time. So I never knew my dad. My dad grew up in World War II. He didn't have anything to offer as far as being a father. And and we've had that conversation, and I've forgiven him, because he didn't go through the greatest family life either. Being a refugee at 4 years old in Sabaudia, and watching his donkey get blown up and the guts blowing up on him and all the children, That's his recollection. Those are his childhood memories. So I don't expect him to be, super dad, So, but I had to learn somehow, and I learned from television, thank God,
Yeah.
I mean, we only had 13 stations in Canada, but that's what I learned. I purposely would turn the TV on to watch those shows to learn how not to be. Because how my father was, I wanted to be the exact opposite. How my mother was, I wanted a woman that was the exact opposite. And that's what I found in my wife. She taught me how to love. I never knew what love was. My mother never touched me. She never touched me that I can ever remember. She never held me. She never did anything. And my father was never home. So, there's that. So I had no one. I mean, I grew up stealing food, to fill my belly. I stole food for a decade out of people's gardens, out of the schoolroom closets at lunch hour. I had these plans, these elaborate plans to feed myself every day. I was a thief,
Did she ever abuse you when you were really small, like smack you? Well,
no.
More than
never
smack
touched.
You. No?
Never touched me. No loving and no
So you don't remember
punishment.
I was sitting on her knee or anything like that?
Nope. She never touched me ever. I can remember one time that she actually stroked my hair, and that was because I had to get out of the bath. And this was when we lived in Toronto. I had to get out of the bathtub because the realtors came in and were looking at our house. And I think it was an act to make it look like we were a happy family and you were inheriting a great house. Yeah. And she actually stroked my hair. And that was the only time I can remember ever her touching me. That was the one and only time. And it's as alive to me right today as it was when it happened that day in 1970 or 71. I can almost feel it because that's the only time she ever touched me. Never hit me, but paid zero attention to me as well. I played by myself. 3 years old, 4 years old, I played by myself. I grew up by myself. I did my laundry by myself at 5, 6 years old,
Well, who bought the food in the house? If she was eating you out of house and home, and yet she was incapable of going out, and your father only came home...
Rated.
What's that?
Wasn't this when she started eating heavily? Wasn't that when she was really into the demonic possession?
Yes.
Yeah.
Because,
yes.
Like I say, the 5 stages, you could, they could take years to go through before she actually gets the possession.
But what I'm asking is, when it got to that extent, you're having to steal food to survive. Who was buying the food in the house that she kept eating or was locked up in the freezer if she was incapable of doing anything to take care of herself, let alone you?
Well, that's a great question. That's a great question because here's how it worked in our household. My dad was an avid fisherman. When he wasn't working, he would be fishing. So we had a freezer full of fish. And I was always doing businesses. I had an escargot business in the summertime. And I had a roe business in the wintertime for salmon eggs. When my dad would get a freezer full of fish, we would take it down to he knew all these Italian people at all these restaurants and French people. He would barter off the fish and we would come home with, Reggiano Parmigiano wheels, a 40-pound wheel. Yeah. And provolone, still on the string, the twine. And
that's what it was like in those days, wasn't it?
Yes. And so we had all this imported food, and we'd bring it all home and hang it up in the basement. My dad never went to the grocery store. Maybe once every 3 months, in a blue moon, did I ever see, and I would ask him, can I go to the grocery store? Hoping that I might get a wagon wheel or something out of the deal, or Chips Ahoy or something, but it never happened. But that was like a night out, to go with my dad to the grocery store, and that was maybe 4 times a year. We lived off the land and the bartering. So my dad hunted. He'd come home on the weekends and he would hunt. We had rabbit, pheasant, but all of this food, this salami, provolone, the cheese, all this kind of stuff, we would hang down in the basement because it was cool. So eventually my father had to freeze it all. So we put everything in the freezer and then put the big chain around it. And that's when she would started to hack the chain off. But she ate us out of house and home, so much so that I starved as a child. I starved for a number of years, and I resorted to stealing. Fortunately enough, in my backyard, my neighbor had this exquisite garden that was half of an acre, and it was just immensely taken care of. It was beautiful, and I ate out of the garden every day. I'd steal vegetables, and he'd call the cops on me and chase me, and and then the times at winter time when I was in school, I stole the lunches from the kid, a little bit from that one, a little bit from that one, a little bit from that one, or steal money to buy lunch. I was a thief. I was Aladdin. I came up with schemes. I waited for the bell to ring. I made up excuses to go in the cloakroom. Yeah, I made up excuses to ditch the teacher where there was nobody in the room to steal the lunches before the bell went off. They never caught me, but I remember them putting the notices over the PA system and the announcements in the morning. Whoever's stealing lunches from grades, blah blah blah. We're going to catch you, or whatever. But they never caught me, and I didn't care if they did. So yeah, it was. I ate weeds. We picked dandelions. I'd go out and pick dandelions and boil them and make a sandwich out of it. That's how I ate. I ate like an animal. I'd go out in the backyard, steal guys' carrots while he's running after me, and run down to the creek, wash them off, and eat them. And then hit somebody else's garden halfway across town. Or not to mention all the beautiful.
Was your sister doing the same to survive?
No, she lost an incredible amount of weight. Yeah. Well, she wanted to anyway, but she was living in her room with a lock on the door. She would come out, get some food, and store it in her room. And this is how we lived. I wasn't even aware she was even home half the time because she was locked in her room. She had a big lock on her room from the inside. I barely ever saw her. I don't even know her. We grew up together, and I would see her a handful of times, during a month, and just for minutes at a time. We'd pop in, pop out, to get what she needed, whatever. She never went out. She had no social life, and it was just terrible. It's just terrible. I could go on all day long with just all of the morphed and disfigured situations and circumstances of our life. It's pathetic, and my dad isn't even aware of it today. He's 89 years old. He never really did speak English very good. You can talk to him and you can tell, when you're talking to him, it's going over his head. He's not understanding. He'll just say yes to be polite, So, it's like I had no one to go to say this is wrong, when in fact I didn't know it was wrong, because it was this slow, progressive stages that took place, until I just ran away from home and went to California and slept under the pier, and that's a whole nother story.
Michael, after your mother died, did you ever sit down and talk with your father about her situation?
No.
Did he ever put it down to an illness or something like that?
No, he's not culpable in that kind of he doesn't understand. He just doesn't have the understanding ability, and he wouldn't know how to express it, in English anyway. But this was maybe 3 months ago. We actually did talk about it because I was passing out a lot and having blackouts and getting hurt and stuff like this. And I talked to him about it, and I said, and because he asked me, what's wrong? Because I had mentioned something. And I said, Dad, you don't remember how bad Mom was? I said, I took this with me. I pass out all the time. I have PTSD issues. And I told him what PTSD was. And it's just for the first time a few months ago that he actually realized that I'm struggling with something. The first time in 45 years. We just have never talked about it, and he's just kind of clued out. And you know what? He's an old man now. He's 87, 88 years old. I don't want to put that on him, When he calls me, everything's honky-dory. Hey, Pop, how you doing? Love you. We talk about things, and I leave on a high note. And, I don't want to put anything on him. He's too old for that. He doesn't deserve it now,
No. Not 89.
Yeah, he's pretty old, and he wouldn't understand even if I was talking to him. I'd have to make it such plain English. I mean, I can speak Italian, but he speaks a dialect, and he speaks too fast for me. I speak traditional Italian. He speaks like 4 different dialects, and he comes from a tiny town, so we don't even understand each other when we speak Italian. So, if I'm going to speak English to him, that's going to fly right over his head like a plane. So, he's just too old. I don't want to burden him.
Yeah, when I first went out to Italy back in the 70s, I noticed, because this was the old times, that the families there, they wouldn't talk about anything,
Exactly.
to do with the paranormal, or it was all about, if they were going to talk about anything, it'll be about the malocchi, the evil eye.
Yes.
And that's it.
Yes. And, this kind of stuff was going on.
Sorry, carry on.
No, it's okay. This kind of stuff was going on even with my mother's friends. Yeah. And I write that in my book, that they would call her and say, something keeps following me around at nighttime and tapping on the wall and scratching the wall. And she said, I heard her one time say, her friend lived in Niagara Falls. And I wrote this in the book, that she was going to bring her son and go sit with her for a few days, and comfort her. And I'm like, oh my God. And to this day, I remember going. I remember getting on the bus and going, but I don't remember one single moment of being there. I was, I completely shut it out of my memory. But, there were things going on way in the beginning, even when I was little, It just got progressively worse, because, if you're familiar with demonic impression and how this stuff works, it always starts somewhere in the house, some sort of knocking, scratching, doors opening.
There's always a cause to it.
There's always a beginning. There's an invitation. There's an invitation put out. That's right. And then it begins to encroach more and more into your life until that person is possessed, because they're not pushing it away. They're not denying it. They're accepting it in a way, and it's an invitation. And I've listened to all Malachi Martin's, all of his stuff. And, my mother follows all of those steps perfectly, completely, to complete possession until it killed her, at 46 years old, And, I have to say that I helped the problem. She would give me money. There would be lucid moments where she would give me money and she would tell me, go out and buy a bucket of chicken and 5 hamburgers. And I'd go, oh, sure. And I'd go over, and she'd eat it all. I mean, just devour it in like 15 minutes. And I'd be, what the hell? I mean, it was like shocking to me, but I stole money. She'd give me money. Oh, here's my chance to not bring back a receipt and score a couple of bucks here, So I became a thief because I needed to eat too, but I didn't want, whether it was chicken or whatever, I would go to the store or take my friends out. I always wanted to take my friends out to lunch because to me, that was, having friends was wonderful. I cherished that, people I could sit and talk with and laugh and, but there wasn't much of that, through
Well, what made you actually decide to come out of the closet, so to speak, and write a book on this?
Well, I started this book probably 2 years ago, and it was, I don't know, I probably did like 60 or 70 pages, and I started it as a legacy to my kids. Because, my kids, I think to myself, they don't want to hear this crap. It's so negative and horrible. They don't want to hear it. They might want to read it when they're older or when I'm dead, because, when you get older, you appreciate things more and want to know more things. So I started that, and then I put it down for a little bit, and then during COVID, I'm a musician, so we were the first ones to go. So I'm sitting at home doing nothing for weeks, so I thought, you know what, I'll just continue writing the book. And then I started writing the book, and I told my kids about it, and they're like, Dad, I've told a couple of friends of mine, and they think that's the craziest story they ever heard. They would love to hear that story. You should go public with it. And I said, yeah, I kind of played with the idea. So I kept writing, and I kept talking with them because, I value their opinions, And they kept telling me, Dad, you got to put this out. You know, there could be more people that are going through this because I know you feel like a freak. And I said, you know what? You're exactly right. So I sat down during COVID and I wrote for like 4 months straight and finished the book. So originally it started as a legacy to my children, and then it ended up as a you know what, I need to talk about this, because they kind of told me, hey, Dad, there might be other people that are going through the same thing you did. They don't have to suffer like you did. And that's a big one for me, because I suffered unnecessarily, even though people knew there was something wrong at our house. Even if you didn't believe she was demonically possessed, there was something wrong with that woman. And to bring her back where there's children, where there's minors, was wrong, you know? So I decided, you know what, you're right. I'm going to make this public. And then once I did that, I said, you know, people started asking me, you know, well, what happened after? And I said, oh my gosh, people want to know what happened after? I got to write the aftermath. So from 19 to this day is what the aftermath is about. Like all these things we kind of been talking about, how it affected me in my social life, in my relationship life. I couldn't even talk on the phone for years. I had to have my wife do all my phone calls because I just couldn't talk on the phone. I had no social abilities whatsoever. You know, I just wanted to hide, you know? So
for people
there's
who
all
read,
that.
I'm sorry.
Go ahead.
These stupid delays with Skype. With this book, now that it's written and it's out there, what are you hoping that people take away from it?
Well, from the people that are reading it and contacting me, I'm getting a lot of people that are now starting to contact me and say, hey, listen, I have such compassion for what you went through. That right there in itself is so much healing for me, that somebody's relating to me. They might not be able to relate to what happened, but they can relate to the tragedy of it all. That, oh my God, this poor boy had nothing and was subject to such trauma. So that in itself has been wonderful for me. That's been a healing aspect that I never, you know, when I released this book, I thought, oh my God, I better hold my hat. People are going to call me a liar. They're going to say that's bull crap, or you're just doing this to sell books or whatever, you know, and that was never my intent. My intent was to, like my children said, somebody might read this out there and say, hey, this is happening to me. Because if I had known, if somebody had come to me and said, what's going on with your mother is not right, you don't have to live like that, that probably would have opened up my eyes and I would have had a completely different life. I would have went to the cops and say, or, you know, to some adult at school, you know. But even some of my teachers at school, they knew something was wrong with me, but they never investigated. They just asked me a question. Well, is everything okay at home? You know, you're 13 years old. What do you say? You know, you say, no, of course not. You say, no, everything's fine. Everything's fine. Oh, okay. And then they leave at that. Nobody dug. If they had only dug a little deeper, you know, that my life would have been different. You know, so that kind of thing, thinking that there's another boy or a girl out there like me who might be going through this exact thing, because people always assume it's your fault. You know, when you're children, you think everything's your fault, you know, that if somebody out there, or maybe somebody who's already gone through this and said, oh my God, I thought I was the only one on the planet, because that's how I feel. You know, I could say, hey, you know, I remember reading the book by a guy by the name of Dave Peltzer, a book called It. What's that? A Child Called It. Yes, A Child Called It by Dave Peltzer. He was locked in the basement. They put chains on him, his mother, and fed him like a dog, you know, for a number of years. And I reached out to him and I said, hey man, I can totally understand what you went through. I wasn't chained, but in a way I was. And he just blew me off. He just blew me off like, sorry, man, later. And I thought, oh my gosh, if this ever goes somewhere, I'm going to make sure that every person that ever contacts me, I am going to talk to them. If they're going through this, I am going to get them help. And because, you know, like I said, I feel like a freak. I desperately look for somebody who's been through.
A freak.
We've
Yeah,
You
well,
were
I
the
do,
victim,
because
you know you were the victim, so you shouldn't feel like a freak. But one thing I want to say is, did you ever feel anything for your mother as a mother, although she was
absolutely.
never? Could you ever
Absolutely,
say
I
that?
did.
Could you ever turn around and say, "I love you, Mum. I loved
No,
my mother"?
I never. I can say that, yes. And I did even while it was all going on. I wanted to kill her at one time, and I actually made plans in my head to kill her and do some sort of big thing at school.
Yeah.
But I just couldn't. And I would say to myself, but that's your mother. That's my mother. You know, I don't know what's going on with her, but that's my mother. You know, there was an even time where I beat her. I beat her with my fists, you know, because I thought I was having a moment of it's me or her. Yeah. I had a moment where I thought, oh my God, yeah, it's me or her. This is it. You know, there were many moments like that. And one time she was in her chair and I just started pounding on her with my fists. And she went out of her mode and she began to cry. And she elicited a human behavior that I had never seen in my entire life. And I backed off and I ran into my room and I cried because I had seen her as a human, which I had never seen before. And after that day, had never seen after. I had never seen her act like a human being, with compassion, with sensitivity, with love in her eyes, with cognitive skills. I had never seen her like that. Yeah. You know, I had only seen this distant woman at first, who was kind of there, but not under her own control, and then see her spin completely out of control to, you know, absolutely lost. You know, but I did feel for her. I did, you know, sometimes kids would say things at school, oh, your mom's crazy.
That particular time you weren't disconnected from her as your mother?
No, I was always, right up until the very end. I was connected to her at that point. I never let that go because she was my mother, even though I didn't even have any memories of her being kind to me. But I knew I had that bond. I had that bond that she was my mother. Whatever's happening to her, whatever she's going, she's still my mother. Yeah. You know, and that never left, and And unfortunately, she died, and I never had a chance to. Of course, I regret it now. If I, you know, even if she wasn't listening, that I could say to her, "I love you," you know, to her face. I, you know, as an adult. Yeah, as an adult now, knowing what I know about demonic possession. Oh my gosh, okay, this is what happened in my house. You know, but I wasn't able to discern.
So you don't blame
what
your
was
mother.
going on. I do not blame my mother. I do not blame my mother at all. I blame the entities, who, by the way, have visited many of my other family. I've had several people commit suicide in their basement by hanging themselves, and one of them was my cousin, a female. She hung herself with 3 kids. She had 3 kids, and she hung herself in the basement. And that, in my family, that's happened 3 times.
Jesus.
And that is appalling to me. And that is the way Judas died. That is a demonic explanation for demonic activity in the genealogy of people's lives. And if probably I was able to look back and see more, I would probably find a string of that throughout the ages, probably back to the 13th century, as far as we can. My uncle seemed to be able to track our family to the 13th century to Calabria. So that kind of thing was always prevalent in our family, suicide, but everybody hung themselves in the basement, even a female. That's not the way females go.
Yeah. Do you feel that anything ever tried to attach itself to you? Oh, yeah, absolutely. I mean, this didn't stop when I left. When I came to California, it didn't stop. This demonic genealogy carried on into everywhere we moved. We saw all kinds of things, and that's in my book too as well. There was multiple things going on, and more banging, more broken stuff, music going on in the rooms. My wife had to call me at work one day to come home because she was terrified. She was sitting out on the patio, you know, on the stairs with the kids, would not go back inside the house, you know.
and things that happened with my girls when they were little. You know, they were telling us, Daddy, you know, there's something that calls my name and comes down the hallway, and it's a ball of light. And then we heard all kinds of banging in their room, just like I heard my mother in my mother's room. The same kind of banging, you know? Yeah, no, it went on. It went on. In fact, when I was writing the book, when I was writing Devil Takes The Hindmost, I was sitting where I'm sitting. I'm actually sitting in the exact same spot right now. Mm-hmm. And I had the laptop on my lap, and I had nothing going on in the house. It was absolute quiet. And I live in a country club, so it's really quiet. And this is midday. I've got no TV on, no fans on, no AC, no nothing. And I'm sitting here writing, and all of a sudden I hear this high-pitched kettle squeal coming from behind the TV. Now the TV's in this big, you know, kind of armoire
like
piece
a
of
kettle
furniture.
Whistle.
Like a kettle whistle, exactly like a kettle whistle. And I'm going, oh my God, are you for real? Are you for real? And I'm hearing it, and it's just screaming. So I take my laptop and I slowly take it off my lap. It's still screaming. Yeah. I put it down, and the second I jump up, it stops. And then I go sit down again, and I'm like, yeah. I know you're here. I sit down, I put my laptop on. 5 minutes later, it starts all over again. And I did the same thing. I put the laptop down really slow, and I jumped up really quick. The second I jumped up, it stopped. Yeah. You know, and they follow you around. They follow you around, and they want to bring you down. They want to gain entrance into your life because they want to destroy you. They want to destroy the institute of the family. They want to take as many as they can with them. And this is what happens. I've got the evidence all through my family, you know, but it ends with me. It ends with me, you know.
I think somewhere way back in the family, there was some sort of curse put onto the family.
Well, there was an invitation for sure. There's an invitation for sure. And, you know, Italy, yeah. Rome is the number one spot for exorcisms on the whole planet.
Was your mother Italian?
Giancola. Yeah, Giancola. Yeah. Oh, yeah. Yeah. I mean, Italy's the number one place on the planet for exorcisms, and people, you know, saying that they're demonically possessed.
They never talked about it out there, but there was a hell of a lot going on, you know.
Yes.
In the background, especially in the villages and the mountains and places like that.
Yes. And, you know, when we were kids, my cousin that hung herself, when we were little, and I'm talking 2.5, probably more like 2.5, we lived together, one apartment above the other, and I noticed that we were totally over-sexualized as two young people. We knew way too much. Our little selves were over-sexualized. It's because our parents, something was going on. And like I said, at that young age, I heard the word seance, you know, many times. I didn't even know what it was. I think I was like 13 or 14 by the time I found out what seance was. I looked it up in a dictionary. I said, no, I remember that as a kid, you know, as young as a kid. And then I just kind of put all the pieces together. But yeah, there were wicked things going on. There were invitations. And unfortunately, you know, this happened to my mother. You know, interestingly enough, that I'm talking to you right now, but I was just in a meeting 20 minutes before I got here talking to a friend who they believe his daughter is demonically possessed. And she's showing all the signs of it. So this is going to be, it looks like, a case in the next few weeks for me and a few friends and pastors that I know. So, you know, it's on every doorstep. It's in every town. It's in every race, walk, ethnicity. It doesn't matter if it's a big city or little city. You know, it's everywhere. And, you know, we really do need to talk about this. This is another thing that I wanted to finish the book, was to be able to talk about this. We've got the paranormal people on TV that are giving us one narrative that I pretty much disagree with.
Oh, yeah.
But they're
so do we.
You're not the only one.
Yeah, I completely, and I've talked to Josh Gates. I've talked to, you know, Dave from Ghost Hunters and John from Taps and the guy from Connecticut, all these guys with TV shows. I talk to them. They won't allow me to come on their TV because I'll put an end to their business. You know, I have been a demonological, I'm not a researcher, but I've been studying this for decades. You know, and they don't want that narrative. They don't want that narrative because it doesn't sell. It's not entertaining, you know. And I've talked to so many of these guys, you know, and they don't want any part of it, you know. But you know, I've got this strain of familiar spirits, you know, that has run through the history of my family, and it's done great damage. But like I said, it ends with me, you know, because I'm the only one, I think, that has ever stood up to it.
Well, Michael,
you know?
We've actually run to the end of the program here. So, your book is Devil Take The Hindmost, and where can people get a copy of that?
Well, it's on Amazon. It's only available on Amazon. It's available in Kindle form, unlimited Kindle, or there's a few apps you can download it on your iPhone or Android. Now, oddly enough, there's another guy who's an author named Michael Anthony Gagliardi.
Okay.
But his books are not my books. I only have one book out, which is Devil Take the Hindmost. The Aftermath, which is Devil Take the Hindmost Part 2, will be coming out. It's scheduled for January release.
Thank you again, Michael, for being on the show, and I want to thank everybody else for tuning in to another edition of the Paranormal UK radio show, flagship show of the Paranormal UK radio network. We will be back next week with an all-new show, and we'll see you all then. Irene, we'll talk to you later. Bye. Bye.